Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 918B, and today's date is March 14th, 2016, and the title of the episode is Turkey Invades Syria and Digs in to Create a Safe Zone. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, as we know, the spying on the American people is continuing. It's never gone away, even though the president said he was going to look into it. They're going to reform it. They're going to pass new laws. Well, they did pass new laws, which allowed them to spy on the people even more. We realize at this point that they're never going to stop. And a lot of countries right now are doing the same thing, where they're spying on their citizens. They're setting up a surveillance state. Now, the National Security Agency data is going to be shared with other intelligence agencies. Now, this is the data that they receive without a warrant, and they're going to be able to share this with domestic law enforcement officials. They have access to the huge troves of American communications obtained without warrants, and they can put it to use in any way they see fit. Now, think about this for a second. All of this information was collected not using a warrant. They've used the Patriot Act as the excuse. They're using the USA Freedom Act as an excuse. And all of this is now filtering down to the local level. Why would they be doing that at this point? Why would they give them access to all of this information? Well, this is what happens when you close down a society. This is what they do. It's turning into a police state. Now, at this point, we're seeing a pattern. Everything our government uses against the foreign enemies eventually makes its way back home, where they say, oh, no, we're just spying on the people outside of the country. And this is how we do it. Yes, we might collect some Americans in this, but don't worry. Remember, they don't purge this. Don't worry, we're going to get rid of it, but they never do. And all this technology they're using is now being turned around and used against the American citizen. This is not just happening here in the United States. It is happening in France, the UK, Spain, Australia, Canada. In Spain, we see the Spanish authorities. They're spying on the country's residents through their phone calls, text messages, browsing history, bank cards. This is coming from Edward Snowden. He's saying that approximately 45 million people who live in Spain send text messages, make call or visit websites, and every time they do that, a record is being created. Every time they go and make a purchase, a log is being created. He's saying that France, Germany, United Kingdom, they're all doing the same thing because we understand what's happening here. As the system collapses and falls apart, we have two scenarios. We know the U.S. government central bankers, they want war. War covers up the collapse. War keeps people busy. War reduces the population. War allows the system to be restarted without them being blamed for what is happening. If they cannot get war started, and believe me, they're going to continually try, but let's say they can't get it started. The other scenario is the entire system falls apart on its own. There's no cover-up. And the blame goes to the central bankers and the U.S. government. At this point in time, they realize the people are going to say, okay, you just brought down the system. We don't want you in power anymore. There's no need for you. We need to restart everything. This is what they're worried about. This is why we see each one of the private Western Central Bank countries putting more police, military on the ground, spying on their people, creating more draconian laws, taking the rights away from the people, because they're scared of this scenario. They're afraid that the blame will fall on them and the people will say enough is enough. It's happened in many, many countries. And it's going to continually happen because governments get out of control, especially when they're controlled by a central bank. Now, if there is war, that doesn't mean there's no collapse. That means it's just covered up. People are being, kept busy. People are dying in a different location. But they'll have the ability to cover up who actually caused the collapse because it's easier to blame a country or a group. And these are the two scenarios we're working on right now. And, of course, after everything is said and done, they want complete control of everybody. And this would be their opportunity. Now, out in Poland, there are protests going on. Tens of thousands of protesters have turned up for anti-government rally in Warsaw, demanding the ruling party respect the Constitution. The demonstrations comes amid an ongoing conflict between the Polish government and the Constitutional Court. And about 50,000 people were waving Polish and EU flags, saying that many of us are afraid that we'll have a dictatorship in Poland. And many of the countries are really worried about this, about government taking full power, making the decisions, and dictating it to the people. Now we see out in North Korea allegedly, and of course there's no proof that they exploded some type of hydrogen bomb underground. We saw an earthquake recorded, and of course there's no radiation or anything that anyone can prove that they actually did this. But of course this didn't stop the US, South Korea, the coalition forces from beefing up their military budget, holding these large-scale military drills. And this is what the US and South Korea are doing right now. Both drills are Key Resolve and Foul Eagle. And we see the USS John Stennis is coming into the fold and joining the drills in South Korea. It's the US supercarrier. And North Korea is out there using propaganda, trying to convince whoever that they have the ability to use nuclear weapons. Now, do we know for a fact that this is coming from North Korea? No, we don't. We see it in the corporate media. And we see at this point that they will take whatever they say and blow it out of proportion to make it seem like they're the ones who are going to attack. Now, do they have the ability to attack? No. They don't have miniature nukes. They don't have a weapon system that can reach the United States as of yet. And we can see that the U.S. realizes that North Korea is easy to provoke. They know they can get them to say these things. They know it's easy for them to do this. And this is why they turn to North Korea at this point, because they're trying to provoke North Korea as hard as they possibly can, because they want any country to start this war. And they know eventually that this will bring China into the fold. And how do we know this? Well, they've been preparing this for a very long time. They've been encircling China in the Pacific. Obama was out there saying that there is potential for conflict with China. And we know they're pushing this as hard as they possibly can to start a war. Now, a couple days ago, Iran fired a missile, and of course the U.S. is out there saying that they violated the deal, they violated the UN Security Council resolution, and we need to place additional sanctions on Iran. Now, when we look at this very closely, the ballistic missile test conducted by Iran did not violate the UN Security Council resolution 2231 because it does not prohibit ballistic missile launches. It only calls on, and calls on means ask a person or organization to do something to restrain itself from such activities. So it doesn't prohibit, it calls on Iran not to do this. So we see Russia is saying this is not a violation of Resolution 2231, because when you call on something, you cannot violate it because you're only asking. And we can see at this point, it doesn't matter because the U.S. needs to get into Iran. Remember, the entire deal was not about nuclear weapons. It wasn't about their nuclear reactors. It was about propping up the system and using the dollar on their natural resources. And Iran already made the announcement they're not going to be using the dollar for the sale of their oil. This is a major problem. Now, of course, they wanted the funds released to Iran that was held in sanction for Iran then to take that and hopefully spread this around and maybe purchase American goods or whatever. They wanted more of this in circulation out in the Middle East area. But we can see their plan at that point is now falling apart. Now, the U.S. is trying to make a motion for sanctions. Russia is saying they completely oppose to any type of new sanctions whatsoever because there was no violation. Now, out in Libya, we see the U.S. is continually going on saying that the Islamic State is growing in Libya, in Africa, and the U.S. right now is seeking the coalition to go into Libya and other areas in Africa. Now remember, wherever Russia and China are, this is where the United States needs to go. Because we already see them fighting in Sudan, Somalia, and all these other locations where China is. But what's very interesting, the U.S., the coalition forces, they want to get into Libya to remove that government in Tripoli and put in the puppet government. Or if you want to call it their unity government, which is the puppet government. So, very interestingly, the parliament voted no to the unity government. So they went ahead and they created a new unity government. And the parliament saying, well, we don't know, we really don't want this to happen. We have to put it to a vote. But we see that France, the US, UK, they don't want to wait. Time's running out at this point. Everything is collapsing. So, the UN-backed unity government announced Saturday it was taking office despite lacking parliamentary approval. They're going in and saying, we're the new government now. We don't care what you say. So they're doing whatever they want. They want the unity government in there because they want the unity government to invite the coalition forces in, which will allow the US, France, Italy, Egypt, UK, all to come into the country and take over and basically remove the elected government in Tripoli and put into place the unity government. Now Russia is saying, whoa, just a minute here. You can't just do this. If there are any forces going into Libya, it has to be approved by the UN. Now remember, Russia has veto power. And we need to bring this into the UN to make a decision. And of course, as we know, the US, the coalition forces, they just want to go in there and put back the puppet government. Now, over the weekend, Turkey was hit with another attack where there was a blast in a crowded center of the Turkish capital, killing at least 34, 38 people, injuring about 125. No one's really claimed responsibility for the attack, but what we can see right now is most likely this was a false flag. Why? Because Turkey wants to blame the Kurds. It gives them an excuse to go into Syria and Iraq and bomb the areas. And they're not bombing the Kurds. They're not bombing the Islamic State. They're going after the forces in there that are trying to remove their proxy army. But they need an excuse for all of this. And one way you can tell that this is a false flag is that the Turkish authorities banned Twitter, Facebook, because they didn't want the images spreading all over social media. And it wasn't just Facebook and Twitter. A number of other sites were also blocked because images showing victims of the tragedy were being shared on those platforms. Broadcast media also said they were banned from covering certain aspects of the attack. Now, why is that? Because they didn't want them to pick up on anything that might show that this was a false flag. The U.S. did this during the Boston bombing, where the cell towers were completely shut off because they wanted to halt the pictures being transferred from one location to another. The only thing they didn't realize is that people were continually taking pictures, and when everything came back up, they started to transmit the pictures over the wire. So, does this work? No, pictures are still getting out. They're trying to control the situation, and this is what we see when there's a dictator in charge. They shut down the freedom of press. Now, as soon as this happened, not 24 hours later, all of a sudden Turkish warplanes bombed the Kurdistan Workers' Party in Iraq. Now, are they responsible for this? No, but they're going to use it as an excuse. They're going to go round up people. Remember, the last false flag they had, the whole investigation was completely dropped because they couldn't prove anything. And we can see they're still trying to do this. They're still trying to show that they're being attacked. If they're attacked and they can prove it, then they can have NATO join in and they can go into each one of these countries. This is what they're trying to do. And we can see that the U.S. right now is creating Erdogan as this lone crazed nut. It seems like he's the poster child for starting the entire war in this area, because what we're seeing right now is that Turkey is using mission creep to invade Syria. And on the eve of the Geneva peace talks, we see there's evidence that Erdogan is bringing troops into Syria. And Russia, Lavrov says, we have proof that he is bringing in troops, and we realize what he's trying to do. Because the troops are digging themselves in several hundred meters from the border in Syria, and they're trying to create this safe zone. So they have troops on the border, some over the border a little bit. They're digging in, and they're slowly creeping into Syria. And this is completely against international law. They're invading another country. And they're becoming desperate at this time because they need a war. They're pushing as hard as they possibly can. Now, we realize that the peace talks have started. We see that the groups are meeting. Of course, part of the agenda is for Assad to step down, or can we partition Syria? Those seem to be the two main topics. Maybe there are more. They might come out later. But we already see that the Syrian government is saying, listen, the presidential elections and the removal of Assad are off the table at this point. Russia says no to Syrian federalization, which is the partition of Syria, off the table. So what's left on the table? That's peace. So we see Putin came out and did something very unexpected. He said that he's going to be removing some of the troops in Syria. So he's given an order that the main part of the Russian military to begin withdrawal from Syria, saying it's completed its main objectives. And the pullout will start tomorrow. This was agreed to by Assad. They have the edge now. The Islamic State is decimated. Lavrov says that they'll be defeated in Syria and Iraq very shortly. They've liberated a lot of cities, a lot of towns. They're on the run. But Obama is still trying to build up the anti-Islamic State coalition. He's out there saying we need more troops, more military assets, more of everything into this area to go after the Islamic State. Now, on the one hand, we have Assad and Putin agreeing that, okay, we have the upper hand, the Islamic State's on the run, they cut off the oil supplies, and it's only a matter of time. They did this in a couple of months. compared to the United States. They've been working on this for almost 2 years. And we see Carter, Obama saying that they need a strong anti-Islamic State coalition with more assets in the area. Now, something doesn't make sense here. Why would they need this? They don't. Actually, the United States was never invited into the country. Neither were any of the other countries. It's basically against international law. They invaded a country. But we can see right now that Putin did this at the perfect time to show that he's not there to take over the Middle East. He's not there to take over Syria. He was invited there by Assad to help out and to get rid of terrorists. And there was al-Nusra, there's al-Qaeda, there was the Islamic State, and there was one person representing the Free Syrian Army. Because we know most of them were put into the terrorist groups as soon as they were trained. There was really no Free Syrian Army. That's why the United States government central bankers could never give any type of list or tell anyone where they actually were. So we see at this point that this whole peace process is going to change at this point. This is what Putin is hoping. This is his strategic move, where we see the United States and the coalition forces building up military assets. Now, Putin seems that he's very confident that the terrorists, the rebels, are pretty much wiped out in Syria right now, and they're on the run. Their funding is pretty much gone. He's confident that Assad is secure now, and he left on a high note where he's saying the mission that they set out to do was a complete success. And he started the peace process with the U.S., the opposition, and Assad. And a couple things are off the table. The transition with removing Assad is off the table, and partitioning Syria is off the table. And we're going to have to see what the U.S. does, because we understand we've been here once before with the Geneva II talks back in 2014, prior to the election of Assad in July of 2014. They had the Geneva II talks, and we had the U.S., Assad, the opposition group. The only thing that was on the table was Assad to step down. They didn't talk about anything else. That was it, and they never went anywhere. Assad was reelected in June of 2014, and then we saw the Islamic State in July. So that was already planned. Here we see the same thing happening. This time Assad has the upper hand. We know that Carter, Obama, calling for the coalition forces to come together. We know there was a huge drill with Saudi Arabia of hundreds of thousands of soldiers, military assets. And we're going to have to watch this very closely to see where this goes, and keep an eye on what Turkey is doing, because they seem to be the wild card, and it looks like the U.S. is using them as the crazy nut who might start war. Remember, their entire goal at this point is to get a war started, because if they don't get the war started, everything is blamed on them. It doesn't mean the collapse is canceled. It's just the way everything is perceived when the whole thing comes tumbling down. And it is coming tumbling down. And this is why you still have to be prepared. This is why you still need your food, your medicines, your toiletries, your weapon, gold and silver to protect your wealth. If you're doing what you're doing, keep doing it. Keep preparing, because the storm is coming. If you haven't started, you can go to lifereliance.com. They have bug out bags, water filtration systems, seeds. You can customize your orders. So you can go to lifereliance.com and get what you need to weather the storm. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.